Poop stinks. It's a simple fact of nature. Controversial opinion, I know, but it's true. But some animals seem to like it. I mean, flies can't get enough of that shit. Why is that? Today, we're talking about how evolution shapes our preferences. So, why does poop stink? To make a long answer short, for humans, it can spread sickness and potentially fatal diseases. So, we evolved to find the scent repulsive. But poop is beneficial to some animals like flies, so they evolved to find the scent attractive. But how does that kind of evolution even happen? Well, for a lot of animals, not just humans, their own feces can harbor all kinds of dangerous bacteria that spread diseases. So, if some members of a population get a random mutation that make them find the scent of their own turds to be repulsive, then they'll naturally avoid it. Those animals would be less likely to get sick, and so on average would live longer and be able to reproduce more. That means that the trait would be able to spread more, and slowly the poop smells gross gene would be everywhere and just kind of be the default state. If there were ever any of those animals that randomly got the poop smells good gene, they would most likely have gotten sick from not avoiding it, and that gene would very quickly exit the gene pool. The opposite would be true for flies with the poop smells good gene. See, poop provides all kinds of nutrients for flies and actually make a great nursery for their young. The flies that eat the poop would be in better condition overall due to having better access to nutrients. They would live longer and be able to reproduce more. Then, because they laid the eggs in poop, their young would be more likely to survive to adulthood, and those adults would have been fed better and generally be in better shape than other competitors. It's basic survival of the fittest, baby. So, a beneficial trait will naturally spread a little with every generation, while a detrimental trait will usually die out within a few generations. That's why pretty much everyone agrees that poop stinks, but all flies agree that poop smells good. Those preferences are beneficial, and so the gene that controls them would spread more. The spreading through the population can happen with any trait that's beneficial. Those with the beneficial trait would be able to outcompete and reproduce more, so the beneficial trait would become more prevalent. But those beneficial traits aren't always beneficial to the individual. And according to the selfish gene theory, that's the way it's supposed to be. The selfish gene theory is the idea that evolution is driven by genes, not the individual or the population as a whole. See, the classic view of evolution is that the most fit individual will survive, survival of the fittest, and those individuals who survive and reproduce would be able to pass on the traits that helped them to survive. So over time, environmental pressures would drive evolution in one direction or another. The selfish gene theory states the genes that get passed on aren't necessarily the ones that help the individual to survive, but rather the genes that are best at replicating themselves and making sure that they get passed down. One really interesting example of this is the antechinus. See, these cute little guys go on a mating frenzy so intense that they die at the end of it. They literally themselves to death. The males do, at least. They go so hard in the first mating season, it's really rare for them to survive. Females, on the other hand, can live 3 or more years, so will typically have 1 or 2 full mating seasons. And even though they only last for 1 season, the males mate so many times that it's usually more than enough to make sure that their genes get passed down. And that's the more important part. So in this case, the survival of the gene, not the individual, is what's driving evolution. Another interesting example of this is actually present in a lot of different species: warning calls. When an animal gives a warning call, it can actually put itself in danger. The predator animal would also hear the warning call and know exactly where their prey is. But if the warning call means that several other individuals of the species are able to hide before the predator gets to them, then it's still a net win for the warning call gene. The one individual that sacrificed themselves with the warning call potentially saved several others with that gene, and now they can go on and mate and spread the gene even more. There are plenty of other examples of traits that endanger or hurt the individual but help the species or gene, but I think you get the idea. You guys are smart people. So, according to the gene centric view of evolution, it's not individuals that are competing to see who can pass down their genes, but the individual genes are competing to see who can copy themselves more and make sure those copies get passed on. The problem here is we don't really know which model is correct. We've seen examples of different animals that have evolved in different ways. Some are more focused on the individual, or the population, or the species. The simple reality here is that we don't have as complete of a view of evolution as most people like to think we do. Evolution is often presented in schools as something that we have kind of solved all the mysteries of, but that really isn't the case at all. This kind of presentation isn't just inherent to evolution, though. A lot of sciencey subjects are taught like this, but there are still huge holes in our understanding of pretty much every subject. I mean, look at dark matter and dark energy. What the heck's going on there? But I digress. Back to the poop question. Poop stinks because it was evolutionarily advantageous for us to avoid poop. But how many of our other preferences are determined by evolution and genetics? Well, a lot, actually. Sugar, for example, is one of those preferences that evolution picked for us, which can seem a little bit counterintuitive, seeing how sugar's kind of considered a bad thing today, or at least not the best thing diet-wise. As we talked about earlier, evolution can eventually make bad things undesirable for us. So, why do we want something that's bad for us? Well, back in the early days of humans, sugar was mostly found in fruit. Fruit generally also has a lot of good vitamins and nutrients, and sugar itself was a great high energy food. Back before agriculture was a thing, it was generally harder for everyone to get all of the vitamins and nutrients that they need. So, those who ate a lot of sugar, and thus a lot of fruit, would have the advantage of having more energy and generally being in better physical condition. So, like with the poop avoidance gene, the sugar preference gene was favorable and able to produce better, stronger individuals. Eventually, the gene became really prevalent, and at this point, pretty much every modern human loves sugar. Now, fast forward to modern times. Food companies began taking advantage of that preference for sugar and started pumping food full of sugar with very little nutritional value. That's how we ended up where we are today with a ton of sugary foods and drinks, and why overconsumption of sugar is such a big deal now. See, a little bit of sugar, and especially in the context of fruit, is not that bad for you. But when there's a ton of sugar in everything you eat, it can get to be pretty bad. So, why haven't we evolved to not like sugar then? Well, evolution is really complicated, and there are a ton of factors to consider here, but here's the main big one. A love for sugar doesn't really stop someone from passing on their genes. If there was a gene that made people like the smell of poop, it would have quickly killed off the individuals who had it before they had a chance to reproduce. They would have gotten very sick at probably a pretty young age. But the kind of diseases that come from overconsumption of sugar tend to act really slowly. According to the CDC, the most common health problems from overconsumption of sugar is heart disease and type 2 diabetes. Both of these things don't really affect someone until they're well past the age that they would have had kids, especially with modern medicine. So the sugar loving gene has already been passed on. There can also be neutral random mutations that can affect preferences as well. Like I was talking about earlier, beneficial preferences will spread, and detrimental preferences will tend to not be passed on. But if they're neutral, they aren't really driven by evolution. Sometimes neutral traits will spread as random chance, or sometimes they won't spread at all and quickly die out. A good example of a neutral trait is the soapy cilantro gene. Now, if you aren't familiar with this, there's a gene that can make cilantro taste pretty bad, and a lot of people have described that bad taste as kind of soapy, thus the soapy cilantro gene. This gene isn't really beneficial or detrimental in any kind of meaningful way, so it's just kind of there. It's estimated that about 3 to 21% of people have this gene, but it can vary by region and ethnicity. It's not likely to go away completely, but it also probably won't spread very much. A gene that isn't beneficial or detrimental will usually keep a pretty consistent frequency across a population, in the short term at least, but can slowly change over long periods of time due to just random chance. So, evolution can and does reinforce certain preferences, especially if they're beneficial to either the gene, the individual, or the population as a whole. We just aren't totally sure what level gets affected the most, as we've seen examples of each. Maybe it acts on all three levels in different ways. Science, as always, is kind of complicated and a little messy, and we're just not sure. Anyway, that's the video. If you want to see more about evolutionary biology, check out this other video I made about how new species are made. Make sure that you like and subscribe, but most importantly, make sure that you stay curious. Have a wonderful day.